right, Michael Lucchese, welcome to another edition of Civitas Conversations. Michael is the founder and president of Pipe Creek Consulting. He is a contributing editor to Providence magazine. He's also an associate editor at Law, Liberty, and Rights for a range of publications, and we're glad to have him at the Civitas Outlook. We're here to discuss your recent piece, How Conservatives Won the Cold War and Lost the Peace. That essay that you wrote for us at Civitas Outlook was a review of a book that's getting a lot of attention by John Gans, titled When the Clock Broke. And I love the subtitle, Con Men, Conspiracists, and How America Cracked Up in the Early 1990s. Now, a lot of people have reviewed this book, and you had said you wanted to focus on the ways in which Gans both hits on but seems to miss what happens in conservatism in the 1990s. The 1990s typically thought of as a high watermark for American conservatives. There was the 94 congressional revolution, which it's hard to remember that Democrats ran Congress for 40 years before that with lopsided majorities. Of course, a lot of those Democrats were actually fairly conservative Democrats from the South and the Midwest, but nevertheless, there was a change that year. And a lot of conservative policy ideas seemed to set the tone of the debate, but Gans says, in keeping with the book, there was a breakup within conservatism in this decade. What is that breakup, Michael?
Yeah, first of all, Richard, thanks so much for having me on. So Gans's book is really a history of the 1992 election, right before and going up to the election of Bill Clinton, and the collapse of George H.W. Bush, his presidential campaign. Gans is trying to argue, and I think that he's right in a lot of ways, that there's a new kind of right-wing reactionary ideology that sort of emerges here. Gans, I think, misunderstands this in some ways. He's a man of the left. He has some Marxist sympathies, and so he doesn't really leave a ton of space for the influence of ideas or of personality. But really, after Reagan leaves the stage, there's a breakup in American conservatism and in American politics more broadly. Reagan was such a charismatic force, such a man of ideas. And as he leaves, a number of other sort of ideologues sort of come in to try to take on the Reagan mantle or are criticizing Reagan's presidency. And the three that Gans profiles that are most important are Murray Rothbard and Sam Francis in the realm of ideas, and Pat Buchanan in the realm of practical politics. And my essay focused mostly on Buchanan and Francis because it seems like both of them are experiencing a sort of renaissance today among the new right. Francis is one of the sort of favored ideologues now, and Buchanan, people like Kevin Roberts at the Heritage Foundation, American Moment, they're really trying to celebrate him. There's even an effort to get him the Presidential Medal of Freedom right now.
Yeah. So when we think about Samuel T. Francis, I remember when I was in college reading his column in the Washington Times. Sometimes he would say things I'm like, oh well, that's very strikingly put. And but there was also in Francis, you could see in his columns, and of course I'm young and I'm not exactly the most well-informed person at the time, but I could tell his thought diverged in many ways from what would be the mainstream conservative thought. Talk more about what his ideas were and sort of what makes them appealing 30 years later to not just the younger conservative crowd currently in Washington. They probably don't want to be called conservatives, but people like Daniel McCarthy and others. The founder of Compact magazine also has sort of a devotion to Samuel Francis. Why?
Yeah, so Francis is really I think the principal intellectual founder of paleoconservatism. And he starts by sort of taking the Southern traditionalist ideas and turning them up to 100, right? But as the 90s go on, he sort of abandons a lot of that and really abandons any kind of commitment to traditional conservatism. I would argue, and I've argued in this piece and elsewhere, that Francis is engaged in a sort of right-wing form of Marxism. He hates religion. He thinks that social conservatism is really misguided. He embraces materialism, and his main goal is to sort of treat the people he refers to as Middle America radicals, NARs, as a kind of proletariat working class movement that he's going to inspire to engage in a sort of power politics. And I think
who are the middle American radicals?
Yeah, so he's mostly thinking of the white working class in places like the Midwest and the South. And he argues that the Reagan movement really abandoned these people. I think that's kind of foolish because Reagan really appealed to those people, right? But he wants to treat them as this proletariat revolutionary source of power, the same way that Marx writes about the working class in Communist Manifesto. And elsewhere, and he openly admits that he's taking these ideas from Marx.
You say he is a right-wing Marxist. So what are the with obviously with Marx it's class that all power turns on the competition between the classes. What are the determining modes for Francis?
Yeah, so for Francis, I think it's both class and race. He was actually fired from the Washington Times for racist columns. He criticized President Reagan for making Martin Luther King Jr. Day a national holiday. And he was really trying to, frankly, I think his ideas were neo-segregationist, right? And I think that in a lot of ways, his problem with the American conservative movement is that it came to agree with the civil rights movement and came out in favor of equal treatment of the races. He really wanted to use race as an issue to sort of break up American politics and pit the white working class against the left, against other races, racial minorities, and use race as a sort of tool in his game of power politics.
So with regard to Francis and the connection to Pat Buchanan, and particularly in this book for John Gans, it's Pat Buchanan's sort of inspiriting 1992 campaign for the Republican nomination, where he beats George H.W. Bush in New Hampshire and makes it a run. But Buchanan, and I've read interviews where Pat Buchanan pays tribute to Sam Francis. And in particular, I think as he's thinking about launching this campaign, he talks to Sam Francis, who tells him, don't call yourself a conservative. That doesn't mean anything to anyone anymore. I don't know what you should, maybe you should just call yourself an American nationalist. That's what you're about. And kind of sets forward these ideas we've been talking about economics, protectionism, building an economic political program around the working class, which Pat Buchanan does rhetorically in the 92 campaign. I mean, that's very clear and is now now looked back upon, as we're told, is sort of a harbinger of where things shifted. He was just maybe a generation early in that regard. But it seems to me that that connection is there, and you talk about that in your review. What do you want to add on that point?
Yeah, so Gans doesn't really get into this, and I think this is one of the problems with the book. He's not really trying to do a history of conservatism the way that, say, Matthew Continetti does in his book, The Right. But I think that one way to understand the Buchanan 92 campaign is there are sort of two poles inside Buchanan's campaign staff. Russell Kirk, who was sort of removed from politics a little bit by that point in time. He served as the chairman of Buchanan campaign in Michigan in the 92 election, and he's sort of urging Buchanan internally to run a Reaganite campaign. Basically, George H.W. Bush is not conservative enough. He's too much a member of the Eastern establishment. He's a throwback to the Rockefeller Republicans we were trying to throw out. And you should just sort of be Reagan 2.0, essentially. And then on the other hand, you have Sam Francis, who's urging Buchanan to adopt this nationalism, this right-wing Marxism, this racial grievance, this conspiratorial approach to politics. And I think at the end of the day, Francis wins out in the 92 campaign. And Buchanan sort of abandons the conservative movement that brought him into the Nixon and Reagan White Houses and turns against it. And that really is that turn, that embrace of right-wing Marxism is why Buchanan is admired by so many on the new right today, right? And I think that part of Ganz's problem is he's a bit of a left-wing Marxist, and so he doesn't really understand that in making that turn, Buchanan is abandoning conservatism as a sort of spiritual principle or an approach to politics that emphasizes the transcendent in exchange for this materialism, and so that turn away from the transcendent to the material, I think, is at the heart of the conservative grapple of the early 90s.
And so it seems that, with regard to, as I mean, I have written about this. I think you have maybe in ways too, that Sam Francis is sort of the harbinger of the post-liberal turn in yet another sense, because Francis is saying, and I think says to Pat Buchanan, the Constitution, the principles of the American founding, the Republican Party errs when it tries to build on those for its overall approach to politics, or for an imaginative appeal to the American people to reorient and recruit their imagination and sentiments towards the Republican Party, because nobody cares about that anymore. And there's the reason why no one cares, he says, is there's no economic interest to support it. There was a time in the Republican Party in the 20th century when you had people who benefited from those ideas and principles, but they're gone. So you've got to re-engineer and rethink things. Clearly, sort of this, I think this, as you're saying, right-wing Marxist understanding of ideas coming into play there. Similarly, for Francis, religion is, I think he refers to Christianity at one point as a form of false consciousness, and as sort of inhibiting the recovery of America. Talk about that, because that maybe that also seems of note.
Yeah, so one of the sort of canards that the new right throws out at the traditional Reagan conservatives is that you hadn't conserved anything at all. And when you think about the sort of aggression of the left on especially social issues, but a whole host of questions, you can kind of understand where they're coming from on a certain level. But in another more profound way, I actually think that the Reagan conservative movement, because it embraces this transcendent vision for politics as opposed to this more materialist vision, it's done a lot to conserve it, especially when we're talking about the Constitution. The originalist legal movement is the great example of this, right? The originalist legal movement has made so many inroads defending the Constitution, advancing a more constitutionalist jurisprudence that even left-wing judges and justices have to argue in the mode of originalism, right? And so I think that while I understand why the sort of culture war approach resonates with some people, and why people are concerned about the state of the country and want something strong and vigorous, it doesn't quite make sense to me why the people are saying we need to turn to these unsuccessful in their own time thinkers like Francis or Buchanan or Murray Rothbard to a certain extent too. They just aren't, I think, the thinkers we need for our time. I think that people like Richard Weaver or Russell Kirk or F.A. Hayek, who I think were much more successful in their own times, they actually can answer a lot of these questions. And on the topic of religion too, I think it's notable that we're sort of undergoing it seems like America, the West more generally, is in the early stages of a kind of religious revival. Young men, especially, are going to church a lot more. And
so some promising anecdotal evidence, certainly.
Yeah. People, I think, are hungry for something transcendent. They're hungry for something bigger than the material, bigger than this limited approach to politics that I think populists, both in the 90s and today, have to offer. And so continuing down this path towards a secular materialism as the reigning principle for the right, it seems like a major mistake to me, not just in terms of the moral element, which is, of course, the most important, but also as a question of practical politics.
So you seem to be saying we could be, which I've thought this myself, we could be entering a world after modern liberalism. A world where the promises of progressivism are just more and more revealed to be bankrupt and untrue.
Exactly.
Many would say yes. But then what's the response? Is the response Sam Francis and this right-wing materialism, which does not believe in God, does not believe in the rule of law, constitutionalism, does not believe really in the ideas that shaped our country, or is what's going to replace it something else, and that is the openness to natural right, the openness to equality and liberty under law, and the understanding that American constitutionalism is good fundamentally, because we can actually come to know the truth about who we are as human persons. Our Constitution respects that and gives us the freedom to flourish in that regard, demanding only that we do so responsibly.
I think in some ways we might be able to position Francis and his right-wing Marxism as a form of almost hyper-modernity, right? It doesn't get beyond the problems here. And there are other thinkers, Gerald Bersello, Peter Lawler, who have argued that conservatism can instead be a kind of post-modernity, right? It can be a way beyond the philosophical problems posed by modernity, and I think that's exactly what conservatism at its best, at its most transcendent, tries to do. It doesn't get down in the mud with the Marxists. It consigns them to the ash heap of history, as Reagan said.
One final question, and this occurs to me. So we're at the end of we're 4 years removed from the Reagan presidency when the group of thinkers erupt onto the scene, so to speak. They fail in that regard. But certainly, the Buchanan campaign leaves a mark in 1992. But we've had the Reagan presidency. We've had a conservative movement come from really nowhere and emerge in a few decades has certainly one of the dominant political ideas in the country. Why then this space in 1992? What opens that space? Is it the end of the Cold War? Was the Reagan presidency not as successful as you and I want to say, or something else?
So I think there are a number of reasons for this. First of all, George H.W. Bush, who I think was an admirable man and for the most part a fine president, was not really a movement conservative. He may have had a conservative disposition. He may have achieved some things for conservatives as president, but he was not really focused on consolidating the conservative movement or managing the different factions within it. And so the blow up between the neoconservatives and the paleoconservatives, which begins the Reagan presidency and continues into the George H.W. Bush presidency, he doesn't really do a whole lot to mitigate that. He doesn't try to get the warring sides to come together around a central set of ideas. And he just is not, unlike Reagan, who very much was an intellectual who annotated all of his Hayek books and who had serious conversations with people like William F. Buckley and Russell Kirk about meaning of conservatism. That just wasn't really how George H.W. Bush operated. And then I think that the thesis that the Cold War anti-communism provided a kind of glue to hold all these conservative factions together, that thesis can be overstated, but I do think there is some truth to it. And so you remove the antagonism of the Soviet Union, and suddenly it's sort of unclear, why is the big idea that is linking all these groups together. So I think it's those two factors primarily.
Michael Lucchese, thank you so much for joining us to discuss your recent piece, How Conservatism Won the Cold War and Lost the Peace, which we will make available in this interview link. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.